Thanks for joining us today. My name is Katie Conti, and I'm joined by my colleague, Deb Belanger, and we're from the Rhode Island Parent Information Network. Today, we're going to be speaking with you about what you can do if you suspect your child has a disability and might need supports at school through a 504 plan. Deb, how can a parent get started?
Thanks, Katie. So a parent needs to start with getting a diagnosis. At this point, they're maybe suspecting that there's something going on, and they need to go to really talk to a medical professional in order to determine that. Just keep in mind, it's important to remember that a diagnosis on it by itself doesn't necessarily mean there's a disability. The first step is to gather information that describes how the impact of that diagnosis is really having an impact on that child's functioning and whether they need a 504 plan. So the first step is to put something in writing. We want a parent or even a teacher can put something in writing to the school department as a referral. And really the best practice after that should be that a meeting is held with those people that know the student best to discuss what data is still needed.
Thanks, Deb. Deb, what are some examples or types of data and documentation that are needed, and who's responsible for collecting it?
Sure. So parents, you need to be collecting that medical diagnosis from the professionals that are working with your child. And again, I want to say that the diagnosis itself by itself does not constitute disability, but really how that diagnosis is impacting that child's life activities. So those private evaluations, data from therapies, private therapies are going to be really important. Schools need to be able to include any academic and functional data, observations in the classroom that should include behavioral, whether there were suspensions, time missed out of class, even information from the nurse if the child was frequently going to the nurse for any reason, and RTI, that response to interventions that might be already put in place for that child.
Thanks, Deb. You mentioned RTI, response to intervention. Can that be used to delay evaluations in determining if there's a disability?
No. Once that referral is made, those other pieces need to start happening in addition to keeping those interventions put in place. So this can be done side by side.
Thanks, Deb. What I heard you say earlier was that a diagnosis does not always mean that there's a disability. So how is it determined that there is a disability and if a child qualifies for a 504 plan?
Sure, this is where it gets a little tricky, which is why a team of people with knowledge of the child really need to meet and determine whether there's disability. And disability, the definition of disability is a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So for example, a child has a diagnosis of asthma, which is considered an episodic impairment because it may not be happening all the time. And however, if that asthma triggers an episode where a student is now missing time out of school, out of classroom, this could be a piece that would determine disability and could put in place any number of accommodations. So for this one student that contacted us years ago, or the parent contacted us, the student's asthma was triggered by the cold weather. So between November and February was a really hard time for the student. She missed a lot of time out of school. What was triggering it, the cold weather, especially when she was getting on the bus in the morning. And that would sometimes make her very sick by the time she got to school and would then have to leave school. So the school put in place door-to-door bus service. So she was able to get picked up right at the door, did not have to be out of school or did not have to be out in the cold. And that helped alleviate and remove that barrier to her education. So again, it's really that movement from the diagnosis to a disability that requires those kind of accommodations. And that's what the 504 plan is then developed to remove those barriers.
Thanks, Deb. That was really helpful. My key takeaways today were anyone can make a referral, which should be in writing. Documentation is needed from a variety of sources, and that a team will determine if there's a disability and if a 504 plan is needed. So thank you for joining us. For more information on Section 504 or special education, please visit us at www.ripin.org.